I hope you can hear me. I've got another quilt of Valor loaded up, and I thought I'd show you how I set this up so I load it straight from the beginning. Of course, you're gonna, for an edge-to-edge quilting, you're gonna always top stitch up here and along the edges so that it doesn't move while you're quilting. But you don't ever want to sew your basting stitch up here on the border. You should always pick the first seam line that's closest to the border and use it and straighten to it. I start in the center and I lock my channel locks, and then I'll simply move my long arm along the seam line, adjusting the quilt as I move it so that that seam is perfectly in line with my quilt frame. As I get down here to the edge, you're probably not going to be able to see. Let me see if I can zoom it out a little bit. So when I run out of seam allowance, I'll stop. I'm going to engage both channel locks so it doesn't move. And then this is where I get my ruler out. Long arm out of the way. And here, now I know that that seam line up there is straight. So I'll put my quilter on, my ruler on it, and then I don't know if, let's see if I can make this visible to you. I don't know if you can actually see that the seam line here isn't straight at all, so I'm gonna manipulate the fabric so that seam line matches my ruler. Now if it's too tight here and it won't come out without pulling, I don't want to stretch the quilt. Like right now, the seam line's here, but then it goes like this. I can't pull this anymore, so I have to pull this part in. Straighten it. So I get that quilt straight, and now, as you can see, I'm going to have some fullness here. Lucky me. But that's just the way it goes. Most of the time when you get quilted, they end up being like that. You just have to deal with it. Again, I will, after I go through and line up the entire quilt so it's square, the sides and the top row, if whatever fullness I have up here, I'm gonna spray some starch on it. I'll let it sit for a little bit. Then I'll stitch my basting seam here. And if they're big puckers, I'm going to take big long basting stitches instead of little teeny ones, so I can kind of ease this fabric in. And I'll just keep spraying it and manipulating it till it lays more or less flat. So I've repeated the process on the other end. I've made sure this edge is square, and of course I finished the top first. And you can probably see there's a fair bit of fullness in this top border. Nothing I can't deal with, but it's not the most pleasant experience. It would be much nicer if it wasn't there. If you're wondering why I can't smooth that out, it's because this first row of star blocks are spread out as far as they can go. I can't pull them any more taut without stretching them. So the only option is to ease the border in to match. I thought about this and decided I had better not starch this quilt. This is pretty chintzy fabric here, and it's red, and reds are notoriously known for running, and this hasn't been pre-washed, I can tell by the feel of it. So I'm a little leery of risking spraying it with starch and having all that red run down onto the quilt. So I'm just going to go ahead and baste it with great big stitches about a ½ inch apart, and hopefully I can ease it together. When I do a basting stitch, I start in the center of the quilt and work out to both edges. I do these a single stitch at a time because I don't know about your long arm, but mine won't take stitches this large. So it takes a little while, but it does work. You can manipulate the fabric. I guess any of this is showing up on screen. Or maybe my hands just block me. So I'll go ahead and stitch that down since it'll take a little while, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. Okay, I've gone ahead and run my basting stitches, which are about a ½ 3/4 inches apart along the top of the quilt and then down the first side section to make sure that first row to be quilted is going to be square. And then I went and with my hands, I just smoothed this whole top red border between the stitches as much as I could, and it's still full, but there's nothing big here. That's going to quilt out with not too much problem at all. Where we may run into problems when we get to the very bottom, because as we quilt the entire quilt, it will draw in, and if it has more fullness than the top, it might be a little more challenging, and of course we'll have the sides to deal with as we go. But so that's how I deal with loading the quilt on there straight, and if you've got some fullness in that border, trying to ease it in a little bit. The next thing I wanted to show you is that I float my quilt tops. I do not load them on the top roller, which would be this roller right here. As you can see, my quilt top just hangs loose. My backing is rolled up, and my batting also hangs loose. I stitch my batting and my quilt top up along the roller to the backing, and then of course down the sides, and that's how it's secured. This top roller here is for my quilt top. If you're wondering why I don't use it, a lot of quilters prefer to float their tops, and they'll tell you it's because it gives them more control. I don't know if it gives you more control or not. I don't do it because I'm too lazy. It's one less thing I have to do, and it works just fine without it, so I don't use it. Never have, and I don't think I ever want to try. Anyway, you're maybe wondering, as you're quilting, the quilt draws in. I use, let's see if I can zoom in. See these little clamps? I use these clamps all along the belly bar to hold my quilt, and every time I advance the quilt, I take them off and roll the quilt and then put them back on. Some quilters use magnets. You need, some quilters pin, but you do need something to hold the top since it's not being secured to the top roller.